Hi, Gary.
Hello, Guy.
You all right?
Yes. So Mike Batt.
Mike Batt, which is a name very, very similar to my dad's name, which gets slightly confusing because my dad was Mike Pratt. That's literally a problem no one else on earth has, and is actually not a problem for me. I don't know why I even said it.
So if you start calling him father during this interview chat, we'll know why.
Maybe that's going to be the bombshell. Maybe we're going to find out that we're going to have a Darth Vader moment. In fact, he is my real father.
What he is a man of so many colours, and he has so many skills, doesn't he? I mean, he's done everything.
He's such a polymath. Yeah, starting as an arranger, then writer, then producer, then discoverer, then Svengali, entrepreneur, children's book writer, musical writer. It's endless.
I mean, musical theatre's obviously, and the Wombles. Let's not forget
the Wombles. Come on, an amazing cast of like really quite cool musicians who have gone through all those things.
Yeah, Chris Spedding was one, and Steely Span.
All Around My Hat. Come on, who doesn't remember All Around My Hat?
So Mike is worth listening to because he's I've known him for a long time, and he is one of the funniest people I know. And
he is very, very engaging. So let's get him on.
Welcome to the Rockonteurs.
Okay, guys, I'm ready.
That's a big tune for sure. I actually wrote that originally for Tina Turner.
Of course, I had gone and found Joni Mitchell down in Florida and brought her back.
I've listened to a few of them and they've been really good, man. I'm sitting in the back of the car coming into London. They're brilliant.
Thank you guys for still being around, still making music, still being into it, and doing this podcast. It's fabulous.
So great to talk to two guys that have done this.
Remember me? I'm in a band now. It's called Roxy Music.
You know this thing about the 10,000 hours of experience?
Oh, yeah.
Get good at something. When we recorded Arnold Lane, we'd done about 50 hours.
The Rockonteurs podcast with Gary Kemp and Guy Pratt.
Keep on rocking! Mike, there he is.
How beautiful. Mike, you said you've been doing your own doodles there, but that's what you do as well, isn't it? You're so artistic.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I doodle a lot. I'm a bit of a dabbly doodler.
You dabbly doodle when you're not in between your tweets.
Yeah, I always like to be doing something.
Beautiful drawings.
Well, sometimes they're beautiful drawings, and well, thank you. I mean, I shouldn't say that even there. Sometimes it's very immodest, but sometimes they're just bits of shitty little scribbles, and I still tweet them even if they're shitty because it's what comes out,
But you are, I mean, because you're such a polymath, Mike. It seems like that you have to be engaged in some form, if it's writing or performing or whatever. It's like you can't sit still for a second, can you?
No, I'm a bit of a got to be doing something type of guy. But you guys are too, as well, aren't you?
But your skill.
Not on your level.
But oh,
come on.
But your skills are wide. That's what we're trying to say. It doesn't matter. One day, when you wake up in the morning, it could be a song, it could be a drawing, it could be a book. I mean, Guy and I have been looking at your work, and it's like every 5 minutes, it's like, oh my God, he's done something else.
Yeah, something else. There's this comic, there's this musical, there's this children's book, there's this, it's like make your mind up. Make your mind up.
Yeah, it's desperation.
Who are you? Who is Mike Batt?
That is my problem. It's not really a curse. But it is a sort of a curse.
but no, seriously, getting back to that question. Who do you feel you are? Because you sing, you perform. I mean, I've been watching you dancing in the last couple of days, or what
Have you?
Well, on 0-0, but
that sort of mimey dancing. Really, everyone's dancing around me, and I'm kind of like trying to be Marcel Marceau in the middle.
You've produced big rock acts, and I tell you who I kind of see you as sometimes, Mike. Do you know Ken Campbell was? You must know Ken Campbell. He was a sort of theatrical impresario, and he was fantastic. Yeah, a real all-rounder, taking chances, but full of humour.
You're not supposed to be able to, and I'm the living proof that you can't combine all those things and be taken seriously in all of them or any of them. Because let me just complain for a minute, because I joke around a bit and do cartoons and bits of artwork, a bit more serious, and then write something, and I've never been. Well, I say I've never been a band member, like you guys. But I have. I've been a Womble, So that counts, doesn't it? Because you go on top of the pops and, pretend to be famous. even if
with
it's
a load of
is-
very cool rock and rollers, it must be said, the people who actually passed through the Wombles.
Yeah, true. And it was fun, and I'm not ashamed of it musically or anything. I'm just saying that, so I'm not central to the rock and roll community, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I'm sort of an outsider. But as the years have gone, I've become not quite such a to be avoided outsider. I'm a sort of accepted outsider. But I'm not I'm not a sort of central rock and roll guy, even though I've produced a lot of heavy, I like Hawkwind and Steel Ice Band.
Oh,
people
no,
like that.
we want to get to that. We want to get to that. Because there's some fantastic stuff early on where you started.
I'm sort of really just, you asked me for a psychoanalysis.
Yes.
A psychoanalysis. Before you get to my mother, it's...
that was a long time ago and he regrets it.
Yeah, it wasn't my choice.
This is going well.
No, being born wasn't... I meant being born wasn't my choice, is what I'm saying.
You've just done this new musical with someone, I think it's called Croix Noir, right?
Oh,
which is with David Quantick.
With David Quantick, yes.
You look at something like Lewis Carroll, which is where you worked on The Hunting of the Snark, and there's something about all of these things that have got something in common, haven't they? They're this sort of like strange lands, people trying to survive in this strange world.
I suppose so.
Somehow a king and queen is like coming. It was in the Lewis Carroll situation. There's authority that you're fighting against through humour.
Yeah, not so much through humour. Often through humour.
Surreal.
It's funny that I don't know if this is one or it's just me, does things and then realises how like your real life it is. Because when I got back from my 2.5-year journey around the world, which by the way, for you Guy, it was Atlantic, Caribbean, Caracas, Panama, turn right, up to past Mexico, LA, waited for a while there, then LA, Hawaii, Fiji, Australia.
Wow.
That was the route.
Why?
I don't know why. It was the most stupid thing one would ever do.
No, it's amazing. I'm in awe here. I mean, that's.
No. I mean,
No, there were no oars.
That's why I had to stop at the end of the Atlantic. I was exhausted.
We spent 3 months in the Caribbean, which is where I went to Montserrat and we made an album. And I'd met the McCartney family there. That's where I first met Paul. I hadn't known him before that. Anyway, so I told you we would.
What album was that, Mike?
That album was called 6 Days in Berlin, weirdly. It was written in the Caribbean.
2 albums, you're saying, you did on that trip. You did, and a TV show in Australia.
Yeah.
But you met McCartney, and how was that for you when you were up in Antigua and he was there? Was that not your first meeting?
Yes, it was. And I went to recce the studio, not as if I was going to approve it. I knew it would be great because it was George Martin's studio. And we were moored, as I say, stern to in Nelson's Dockyard. And we thought what we'd do is we'd just go over there, anchor off Montserrat. It was a day's, Guy would call it not sailing, but I'd say it's a day's sail. But it's a day's steaming.
Polluting,
a day's stinking to get to Montserrat. Then we dropped anchor. Didn't know Paul was there. Didn't know that Wings were recording there at all. And
Band on the Run. It wasn't Band on the Run. That was in Africa, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was the one they did with all the duets, Ebony and Ivory, and the one with Carl Perkins and various other people that came in.
What was that?
It was just after John Lennon. In fact, we found out John Lennon had been shot when we arrived at the Canaries. That was a terrible shock.
What was McCartney to you? Were the Beatles an epiphanic moment for you? Because you must have been very, very young.
Epiphanic?
Yeah.
I didn't even know the word epiphanic when that went.
No, because I think I've just made it up.
Oh, okay. Oh, God, yeah. The first real music I got into was Schubert's Ninth Symphony that came through when I lived in Bradford and I was about 9. When, they used to see these bulb catalogues and stuff through the door, all this junk mail. One of them was Concert Hall Record Clubs, and you could get 4 free EPs of classical music.
EPs of classical music?
A selection of Gilbert and Sullivan.
You mean all in the same? They're slotted into a piece of the card.
Yeah, an EP, like we all know an EP, there used to be the vinyl ones.
Yeah.
4 tracks on it.
Okay.
So one of them would be selections from Swan Lake by Tchaikovsky. One of them would be whatever it was, the other classical pieces. Brahms' Hungarian dances. Da 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 da. It's in minor, isn't it? Hang on.
Yeah, come on.
Anyway, that, which was a very bad rendition of it, of course, as we all know.
Oh, I'm in tears here.
That gave me a love for classical music, and it was cheap because it was Concert Hall Record Club. The Beatles came along and spoiled all of that, because they didn't spoil it, they added to it. But this was the beginning of the multi-torn, where do I go in life musically, Mike Batt, because I knew I was forced to buy once a year with my pocket money for 26 shillings a classical album by the people who had inveigled me in by giving me 4 free EPs. So I became really interested in classical music, but I never had any people teaching me it. It was all from reading it. So I used to pronounce all the composers the wrong way. For example, Strauss, I used to pronounce Strauss because it was written that way. And Sibelius, I would pronounce Sibelius because that was the way it's written. Nobody in my world spoke music. My mum and dad weren't musical, and it was all from.
Were you learning anything? Were you learning anything at school or having lessons?
Well, I did, yeah, but it was junior school. 9, 10 years old.
Recorder
and
then.
We didn't record. Yeah, it was literally that. Even then, I wasn't really ever around enough people. So I used to always pronounce all the Italian expressions wrong and everything. Even when I started working with orchestras when I was about 18, I'd say something that was laughably wrong. And they would often be polite enough not to laugh. But I'd find out sort of a year later that I'd said something completely stupid to an orchestra. And
but how did you start to learn? I mean, your skills in orchestration are well known. I mean, how did that come into your life?
I used to go and see Sir John Barbarolli, conducting free concerts at the George's Hall in Bradford when I was about 10 or 11.
This is Bradford, up north.
Up north.
Because there's no hint. There's no hint in your voice.
Well, the fish cakes are better.
Yeah, but there's no hint. There's no hint in your voice, Mike.
Well, there is a very slight flatness to my vowels that people who are from the north would notice. But we went from the north to the south and all different places because my dad was a civil engineer and he would apply for different jobs to try and get up the promotion ladder. And we'd go from Eastbourne to York to Southampton. We were born in Southampton. I was born in Southampton.
Oh, there you go. Okay, fine. So.
Bradford. We were in Bradford for quite a long time, and then down to Winchester where we were in grammar school. And that's where my formative years really were. That's from where I went to see Jimi Hendrix in Southampton when I was 17. Things like that. Because Jimmy rang up and said, I want to see you. I want you to come and see me. No, he didn't.
but you did get in really quickly with the in crowd. I mean, no question. In fact, because Hat Sash and the Coloured Coat.
Yes.
Let me just describe who they are. They were 2 guys, Nigel Weymouth and Michael English, and they were poster designers. They created that whole kind of psychedelic Art Nouveau look for posters. Used to do the poster work for the UFO Club on Tottenham Court Road where Pink Floyd started.
Wow, you know an awful lot of stuff.
And Granny Takes a Trip came out of. It's either Nigel or Michael did Granny Takes a Trip.
Nigel. Yeah, they had this. They used to change
with
the
John
front
Pierce.
a lot.
With John Pierce.
The tailor John Pierce. Yeah.
Got several of his.
See, I wasn't that much. I wasn't actually part of the in crowd. I was head of A&R. Da 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 da.
Yeah, hang on, we want to get to that. Yes, because you sent some songs to a record company and just became the head of A&R.
No, not quite as easily as that. But it
must be. That's what Wikipedia says. That must be what happened.
I schlepped around. See, I told you we've zoomed straight over.
Yeah, we are jumping because I was talking about Hapsash, but we will get there. Just to say that
we'll come back to Montserrat later.
That was a very trendy moment for you, wasn't it? The Hapsash thing. But to get there, Guy was trying to force us. No, I mean Jesus Christ, they were the most the hippest crowd in town. If you look up Hapsash and the Colour Coat on the internet, there's a picture of Nigel Weymouth, Michael English, and you.
I know. In my
17, 18-year-old.
Yeah, 18. In my Austin Reed suit, because I said to Ray Williams, who'd signed me as an artist,
right?
He's the one who had my job as A&R guy at Liberty Records before me. He really was in with the in crowd. Did you ever know who Ray Williams was?
No.
Yeah, I know the name.
He discovered Elton on the same pretty much day as he discovered me.
Oh, he put Elton and Bernie together, didn't he?
He put Elton and Bernie together and left to manage them, leaving a chair empty for me. But it wasn't empty for me, it was just empty. So as I'd been signed to the label and I'd produced one of my own B-sides, the head of the record company said, "Who produced this?" And somebody said, "Well, Mike produced it himself." They said, "Well, give him the head of A&R job immediately." So that's what happened. So there I was sitting in this office, and one day in comes Hapshash and the Coloured Coat. And they say, "Oh, you're Mike Batt, you're the head of A&R. Of course, there was an appointment made in a book. You know, I had this very posh office with they paid me absolutely shit money, I've got to tell you, less than my secretary, but at least I had a secretary. And I had this office that happened to have been vacated by Alan Keane, who was the publisher. He wanted to start his own company. So there's this big office available. It's the only one in the building. So I got this massive office with a signed Picasso lithograph on the wall, and a grand piano, and a secretary with perfect pitch. I mean, what more could you want?
And are you thinking, wow, I'm having it wear my toes here?
I thought, this is it. You know, I don't really need to live much longer, really. This is, you know. And I had a little card with Mike Batt, head of A&R, Liberty Records, so I could get into any club. If I hadn't had a girlfriend, I could have probably got one.
And by now, you'd already produced the Groundhogs' first album.
No, that's 68. That was 68.
That all began then, because then I was looking after production for this, essentially quite a big American record company that was starting off small in England. We were their sort of outpost in England. There was, I think, 11 or 15 people worked in Albemarle Street, a very posh office in London. And everyone, you know, looked to me to make the decisions about what we put out. There was a bloke called Andrew Lauder, you might know. He was a bit of a figure around the business, but he was our production manager. He wasn't the A&R guy, but he really helped me a lot because he knew a lot more about. He was much more of a fan than I was, so he listened to music. He knew every number of every catalogue number of every record we put out, and quite a lot of catalogue numbers of records other people put out.
You say he's more of a fan than you are. So at this point, are you basically more interested in making your own music than kind of listening to other
that's
people's?
The point. I was sort of like, what shall I write next for I spend my day at the piano thinking about my own career. So it was a bad move for them to have appointed me as head of A&R because I was more interested in making my own records. But he, for example, knew all about I was really into blues. Blues was my natural way of playing. When I started in the pub when I was 14 in the pub, I would play blues until somebody asked me to play Slow Boat to China, in which case I tried as hard as I could.
And that's why you end up with Groundhogs, I guess, because that's a very blues-oriented.
Yeah, that first album is full on, just blues.
Yeah,
blues.
so
bass is quite quiet, Mike. Just want to have a word with you as a producer, mate. The bass is a bit quiet on that. I wouldn't have been happy.
Is it?
That was me. Yeah.
You see. Well, what can I say? I think the bloke was just playing too loud, too soft. I kept saying to him, "Can you please play louder?" He said, "Fuck off."
So, did you discover them? Was it with Tony McPhee?
I did, if you like, discover them, but only because they came into the office at the behest of somebody else. And we made I made one record with them, the Scratching the Surface. So, and the only problem with it was the bass wasn't loud enough. But anyway. We still sold 5,000 copies. And the other problem with it was that in those days, it was Tony McPhee is a serious guitar player. I'm sure you both know. Yeah. And I had a great time working with him. I in fact used him on the Hapshash album when we made the second Hapshash album. He came in and he made it all dreamy and lovely and raunchy. But anyway, meanwhile, back at when I first started to produce the Groundhogs, the fashion was to do long tracks. 14 minutes was nothing, you know. So it was the end of a long day. We were at Marquee Studios, and I've got me, there's Jerry, the engineer, and the band. And then the band say, okay, well, let's just do whatever the next track was. So they go off into the band. It's a hot day, the heat coming off the machines and the desk. We're feeling tired. But anyway, they go into the studio and they start off the track. And when they came back in to listen to the playback, myself and the engineer were flat out asleep across the desk. and the tape had come off the end of the thing and was flicking round and round and round. And they had to wake us up so they could hear it back. Obviously, probably not surprisingly, I didn't produce album number 2.
But you did go on and produce Family, though, didn't you?
Well, no, you did all the arrangements for Family.
That's right, yeah. The deal with
Very
Family.
cool, very, very cool album to be.
Do you know what? I was listening to it yesterday. It's called Living in a Doll's House.
Music in a Doll's House.
Music in a Doll's House. And I could hear where Peter Gabriel may well have got his vibe, because Roger Chapman's voice is incredible on that, and it's the year before Trespass, and you listen to it, it's very proggy, and it does sound like Peter was about to sound on Trespass.
When they brought that album into us, it was half finished, and we played it loud in my office, and fucking hell, it blew me away. It made me think, this is how naive I was and how not in the inset I was. I thought, this must be what it must be like to be on drugs. Because, I mean, I didn't do drugs. You know, I mean, dope made me sick, and I didn't ever get the chance to do anything else. Didn't go to all the sort of beautiful people parties, even though they came into my office.
Even though you produced the Hapshash and the...
Yeah, I mean, I pretending all that drugs, just the same as when I did Lewis Carroll. You know, I've never done LSD, for example.
I've never read Lewis Carroll.
But anyway, moving on. It just blew us away. It was so imaginative, punchy, full of surprises. I think I might have nicked a bit of that. You've got to put surprises into music kind of thing. You told me, you were describing earlier how some of my music you'd heard on 00, for example, was electronic, which was because it was the early 80s, and they lent me a Fairlight, the very first Fairlight.
Oh, wow. Of course, because it came from Australia.
And
I went to the factory because it was in Fairlight, which was a suburb of Sydney.
Potts Point.
I didn't know
Potts Point.
Yeah. It's worth listening to.
So
this
it's
show.
named for Fairlight. Yeah.
And his voice sent the shivers through you. And yet, when he sang something like "Mellow in Grey," which was a beautiful ballad, for which they wanted strings, for me to write the strings, they got me to write 4 or 5 orchestrations. So the deal was £5 per arrangement and a credit. And I got neither. I have a theory that if I'd got a credit on that Family album, the Wombles would never have existed.
Well, thank God you didn't. That's all I can say.
Because I would have then been used by other people as an arranger. They would have gone, who wrote the arrangements? And Mike. And other arrangers of my same vintage who did the rock and roll arrangements. Oh, you know, he's into rock and roll. He does arrange. Let's use him. I wasn't that person. I was too busy trying to run an A&R department, which I had no ability to run, and then decided to go freelance to be an arranger, producer, and carry on my solo career. So while I was doing that, everyone else was becoming the sort of cool arrangers that eventually became the cool arrangers. So eventually, if I'd been busy doing the strings for an Eric Clapton record or something, I wouldn't have ever done the Wombles.
But Mike, did you ever go down to the UFO club where Floyd played, which is the club that Nigel and Michael helped run?
No, you see, I wasn't even part of the scene. I was peripheral to that scene because I was young, wet behind the ears. As I said, I bought my Austin Reed suit because Ray Williams, who had signed me and went off, and actually he broke Elton at the Troubadour Club. He's the one who did it. Absolutely no question. Albeit it was working with Dick James as his co-manager. It was Ray who took Elton to the troubadour and broke him. And he was so cool. I mean, he was just like everyone, you should be the pop star sort of thing. You know, he should have been the pop star. You meet him now, he must be 70. Well, I'm 73, so he must be 75. He still looks like, you know, a younger version of Robert Redford.
But I still want to. I want to get back to this.
Oh, you've got the album now.
I've got the first album. You didn't play on this, so this was the Hapsash guys made 2 albums, which are really worth getting. This one was it's Hapsash and the Coloured Coat, featuring the Human Host and the Heavy Metal Kids. But not the heavy metal.
Oh, not Gary Holton, not the Gary Holton heavy metal.
And this came out whenever it did in '67. And this
Brian
is
Jones had something to do
original
with that.
red vinyl look.
Yeah, it was all very cool. All these cool people went into a studio knowing not a first thing about music.
Gary just went and spent 20 grand at Sotheby's on that just so he could do that.
But you played on the second album. What was that called, Mike?
It was the first one. It was red vinyl, which and it was really cool looking as well. And Brian Jones was hanging around the studio doing stuff with them. I think he might have produced it actually. And
did Rory Gallagher play on it as well?
Who?
Rory Gallagher, did he not? Did he have
I don't know. I worked with Rory Gallagher on something I did.
Oh, right. Okay.
But, which is called Tarot Suite, one of my solo albums.
Yeah.
The ignored version, the ignored solo albums, we should call them. I should put them out as a box set, the ignored solo albums. They were actually very not ignored in other places, but in England I was an ex-Womble, so just forget it.
The thing is, though, and I think there is a connection with your entire career for me, with this sort of psychedelia, because this is the beginning of psychedelia.
It was.
Psychedelic period with Floyd and all of what we've discussed. And you playing on that album and being introduced to those guys. Because all of your work, it seems to me, Mike, right till today, is psychedelic. It's got that surreal landscape. You always like to create a world. You always, have crazy figures and good guys and bad guys and lots of humour, but you try there isn't really a project that you've ever been involved in that doesn't have a world around it.
You're right. Yeah, even Tarot Suite, which is one of the ignored solo albums that are coming out on the Velvet box set, is about the tarot cards and the order of the high priestess and the Joker and the magician and all of that. Yes, to me, it's the drama of it that I like. I would have loved to have done more theatre, but it just happened that the one big dive into theatre that I did.
So come on, yeah. Oh,
they forgot to put the water in the swim. They forgot to put the water in the swimming pool, and I dived in the deep end.
This is when you did the Hunting of the Snark, the Lewis Carroll,
and died a death, and getting back after that was very difficult. And the people in the theatre business, I know.
But why? Sorry, because I know you do write hit records, and you have, and obviously, over the years, Art Garfunkel,
massive hit records,
Mellow. I mean, it goes on. But this obsession with you wanting to create a world, what is that, Mike?
I don't know. It's maybe it's because I like.
You see the bigger picture. You see narrative, don't you?
I like projects. I liked it. Yeah, I mean, I've never been a big listener to other people's. For example, prog rock. I would not consider myself to be prog rock, but as you said, I did all these weird orchestrations that then went with the electronica in the early '80s. Because the only reason for that is that all this stuff was being invented, and why not use it? Therefore, if it's being invented, and they all happen to be all electronic synthesizers that could be polyphonic, so let's use it, but do it with my orchestra thing, which is what I like doing, and that became my sort of thing. A lot of people don't know this, but. My ilk, if I've got one, is this sort of like semi-Bartokian sort of Stravinsky type.
Yeah, it's early 20th century classical.
Yeah, but I like to meld it with kind of Chris Spedding doing a heavy metal.
I was going to say, because one thing that runs through a lot of your work, Mike, especially a lot of the orchestral stuff, especially stuff which in someone else's hands could be construed as very middle of the road, is you like a lot of guitars on the heavy side.
Yeah,
don't you? That seems to be a real thing.
And I like surprises, which I think I've got from the family.
You've got a very long partnership with my mate, the amazing Chris Spedding, which is
he's lovely, and he's a great friend as well. It's only because he's good, and I used it. He turned up on a session orchestra with me when I was sort of 19 or 20, and he was the guitar player, and he was so weird. He was so unlike a session man. What he was like, as I would write the parts out, sometimes for guitars it would just be chords, because I was working really quickly on this series of albums I had to do. I had to do 12 albums, or was it 6? I knew at the time anyway, and I worked out a thing where I could do 3 arrangements a day if I did them 4 hours each. So an hour to lay it out on the paper, an hour to do the rhythm section, an hour to put the strings in, and then an hour for the woodwinds and horns. And that's how I did it, 3 a day for God knows how many days, until I had 72 arrangements. And then I went and made 6 albums, which were 6 songs per session, which you could do in those days.
Were these solo albums?
No, well, they shouldn't have been, but we called them the Mike Batt Orchestra. Oh. It was to get myself out of a financial hole that was dug because I was hired to write them, and I was delighted, bought myself a houseboat for £2,500. But they didn't pay me the money. So I owed the bloke the money for the houseboat, and I had a box of arrangements that I'd done, but my own publisher, who had commissioned me to write these arrangements, portrait of Bob Dylan, portrait of Cat Stevens, portrait of the Rolling Stones. Can you imagine trying to make an orchestra sound like the Rolling Stones? You know, Jumping Jack Flash with a 27-piece orchestra, you know, written by a 19-year-old, isn't the most exhilarating music.
Well, Andrew Oldham did it, didn't he?
Yeah, but it was very, very good training for me, because I had no tuition at all in arranging, and this was my sort of do-it-yourself university course.
Wow,
in not only arranging, but also to do 6 songs, which you were allowed to do. I'm sure, Guy, you know, I don't know whether you, from when all your session work and everything, yeah, you would know that in those days, or maybe the sessions you did were all so cool and hip that you didn't need to worry about all the musicians' union rules and everything.
Oh yeah, they were.
Oh no, I've done some of those.
But you know, you could do 4 tracks. You could do 20 minutes in 3 hours, but you could do 4 tracks if you were going to overdub a voice or anything else. But you could do 6 tracks if you weren't going to overdub. So I went in and I did 6 tracks with a 27, 28, 29 piece orchestra, and you had to do 6 tracks. So always the last track, the last of the 6, you were in such a sweat because it's your own money. You know, you'd done a deal. I did a deal with other record companies to get the money to do this thing, just enough money to make this thing. But they were done on such a tight budget that by the time I got to the last song, which had to be the 6th song on the session, it was 3 minutes to 1 or whatever. It wasn't as good a recording as if you'd done it 2 or 3 times, but you got a playthrough of it. And if you didn't start it by 12:57, and if it was 4 minutes long, sometimes they say, "Well, I'm not doing it."
Yeah, they'd stop. They do. Yeah. Orchestras will stop.
Or you'd go over by a minute, and you'd say, "I hope that was all right," and they'd go, "Well, we are into overtime now," and I'd say, "Well, I can't afford overtime," and they say, "Well, never do it again then," and I never did.
We're trying to steer him into port here, aren't we?
We're talking about we're coalescing a lot of points, which is your thing of Ave. We've got Chris Spedding, we've got you liking to create worlds, and then we've got
worlds.
Creating worlds. Is that what attracted you to the Wombles?
Oh, is the world's got something to do with Wombles?
Well, I don't know. I guess that is a world, sort of segue. We're just looking for a way in here, Mike.
No.
Help us out. Work with us.
You know, I was reading that you did all that stuff at Edinburgh, Guy.
Yes.
You know, comic stuff. I just love that. I would love just to surprise. I'd like to do a surprise gig at Edinburgh and go and try and do a bit of comedy. Anyway, forget that.
You should. Yeah, I've seen you give speeches. I can't remember where it was. I've seen you a couple of times.
Neither can I. Meanwhile, where were we? Oh, Wombles.
Womble. We're in Wimbledon. That's where we are.
Isn't that kind of what happened though, Mike? I mean, in the sort of like trajectory, aren't we now at this place in time?
Yeah.
Where this famous kids book, they're going to make a TV series of it.
Yes.
And they need some music.
Yeah.
And someone came to you.
Very smart, don't you? Which is that you're offered a sort of like a session on it, and you say, "No, can I have the characters?"
I was making a living while I was trying to have a hit. I'd left the record company. I was still signed to them. No, then the contract ran out, and I was signed to Dick James Music for a while. I was trying to be an artist still, and carrying on doing that, but stay alive by writing jingles. And I had an agent, and she sent me one day to these people who were making the TV show. I was delighted, and they said, we'd like a song, we'd like a tune. And I said, well, why don't I have a song? Because then I can write about the actual Wombles, and the kids will know immediately what they are. They said, oh, okay, good idea. So they said, we'll give you 200 quid. I said, well, instead of 200 quid, why don't you give me the rights to the characters so that I can make a pop group? Because I really like the characters, and they're just wacky and silly and lovely.
So no one was thinking merchandise here?
No.
You, apart from you, obviously.
Well, it wasn't in their business plan. They were working for the BBC. They were getting so much program, I guess. Yeah. And they did have merchandise very much in mind, but that didn't include pop group. And apart from which, it wasn't going to be successful, was it? So what were they losing? They were losing to some nutcase that wanted to go and dress up as a Womble, get his mum to make a costume. So that's what I did.
Who made the costumes?
My mum made all the costumes.
Are you serious?
Really? Yeah, I have said this story before.
I knew we'd get to your mum in the end. We're there.
No.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. My mum, she was great. She was a PE teacher and an art teacher, but she was wacky. She was funny. My dad was a very sensible ex-army officer, engineer type. Still lovely, but different. And anyway, my mum made all the Womble costumes. She used to make dressing up costumes for us when we were kids. We used to go and clean up at the local Sunday. They hated us. We'd go in and we'd win the fancy dress competition, and then we'd be off down the road to the next one. It wasn't quite like that. But that was the image I've got in my mind, that
Britain's Got Talent.
Yeah, we were the sort of local gangsters that could win. Like we were the craze of our generation.
Of the furry world.
Always get the box of chocolates at the Sunday afternoon fete because we would have the best costumes.
Yeah, that's not the craze.
No, but they they had a manner, didn't they? And we did. Yeah. Anyway,
they had acne, we had Wimbledon.
Exactly, except it was wherever we were living.
And how did you go about assembling the Wombles?
Okay.
Sorry, yes.
So I am trying to get in to see Clive Selwood, who you may know because you're hip kind of people. That he was John Peel's mate, and he had a record. He ran John Peel's record label. And he got hired as the...
Was that Dandelion or something?
Dandelion Records, I think it was.
Yeah.
Anyway, he was the head of marketing for CBS Records when I sold them, finally, after not being able to sell it to anybody else. I finally managed to sell it to CBS Records for 500 quid. And they wouldn't see me because they just thought it was a spin-off from a TV series. Either they're going to make their 500 quid back or they're not. And I thought, I've got to get in to see the marketing people, and they wouldn't see me. In the end, I sort of rang my mum and said, Mum, can you make me a Womble costume? She said, what's a Womble costume? I told her, drew her a picture, and she, saw the things. And so she made me a Womble costume. And she made it out of she was like a Womble when she made it, because she made it out of all the things around the house. Right. In those days, you used to have a plastic washing up mat that you could coil into a nose and stitch down the side and we used a black ping pong ball. I had one Womble costume, and I decided I would wear this Womble costume until the fucking record broke. And
all day, everywhere, down the shops.
Yeah. I put it on a Monday morning, and I took it off on a Saturday evening. I did take it off to sleep. So I would go on the tube in it and just sit there with a newspaper. It's amazing how nobody took any notice. Can you imagine? The British personality was that you don't say anything. If you see something you don't understand, you just keep away from it. I remember coming out of Green Park tube station to try and go which is the wrong place for CBS Records because it was down in Theobald's Road. But anyway, so I had to get a cab. So I waved this cab down. I'm wearing my Womble costume, and he stopped, slowed down, nearly stopped, looked at me, and I said, can you take me to... he must have stopped, because I said, can you take me to Theobald's Road? And he said, sorry, madam, and drove off. He must have thought I was a woman in a fur coat with a great big long nose. Anyway, wearing my Womble costume, I walked into the offices of CBS Records, which eventually became Sony Records, just for those who don't know, and up the stairs, and I went right past Clive's office, all the way up to the managing director's office, and I knocked on the door. I sort of said to his secretary, because they all had a secretary sitting outside, and then she said, "Who shall I say it is?" I said, "Well, say it's Orinoco Womble." And so she went in and he came out, and he started falling about laughing. And they got all the girls from what they called the typing pool in those days. I mean, it was literally that sexist. All girls, me and the managing director, and we pretended to sign a contract with a great big pencil made out of a broom handle. And suddenly they had an artist. The point being that I'd thought to myself, why won't they see me? Because I'm not an artist. If they had an artist they could interview and, send out to do promotion, then they might take some notice. So eventually I went off and did promotion, and I would just get on the train. In those days you could, and go all the way to Birmingham without even the record company knowing. And I'd end up in Birmingham, and I'd go to BRMB radio and walk in with the record. And while they were on the air, I'd say, "I'm a Womble, I've got a record, what do you think?" And they'd play it. And that everywhere I went, we'd sell 100 records in that town in that day. So
but you'd made it a bit of a performance art piece, really.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you might call it that. To me, I just call it being desperate to sell a record.
Yeah.
And so I think you've put your finger on part why I do so many things. Well, one is to stay in work, and the other is just I suppose I'm a bit creatively greedy. I like to do too many different things. But you call it performance art, and I suppose it is in my soul. And I love the cut to sort of 0-0, the mime artist type of thing, because I wasn't a dancer to save my life, couldn't possibly. So I would never, ever put myself up as a dancer.
And when you put the band together, sorry, Mike,
yeah,
when you put the band together, so how was everyone about, like, okay, you're going to dress up as a Womble?
Well, they didn't have time to think. What happened? They know they've got a Womble as an artist, and the record's selling 100 a day in each town. But only the towns I visit. At the time I visit them, and then nothing, or a bit more. But anyway, so Paddy Fleming, he rang me up, and it was Robin Nash was the producer of Top of the Pops, as I'm sure you remember him. Yeah. And he used to call him Robin because he had an Irish accent. He said, "Robin is asking me a question. He said, is there a band of Wombles? If there are, you're on Top of the Pops on Thursday." It was already Tuesday. You know what it's like. If a record went in at number 47 or something, you had a chance of being on Top of the Pops because you're going up to 50. And we went in at 36. And
so it was his idea to put a band together of Wombles.
No. He said Robin Nash asked if there was a band, and because it was presented as I'd put the Wombles, not a Womble, on the record label. So if there was a band, they were on. So he rang me up, he said, "Is there a band?" And I just lied and said, "Well, yeah, there is." And he said, "Well, you're on Top of the Pops on Thursday." So I rang my mum and I said, "Mum, can you make me 3 more Womble costumes in that day and a half?"
It's good job there wasn't a horn section on it.
Yeah.
Who were the Wombles? Who played them?
Well, what it was I had a friend that I played with when I was a kid in school called Andy Renton, who was a drummer. He was a great drummer. He loved, he was a very messy drummer. In other words, he loved Keith Moon. It was all over the place. Fantastic. And he was a year younger than me, and we used to have a duo. Anyway, I remembered him, and he had a band, and they lived just over the road from where I lived coincidentally, in Earl's Court. My first flat in Earl's Court was right by the tube station. And just over the road lived Hattie Jakes.
That's right, in Erdley Crescent.
Exactly.
Yes, John and Hattie with Robin and Jake downstairs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now
Robin, who's the son was a guitar player.
I've got to tell this story. I've got to tell the story when it gets to it.
Okay.
Well, you carry on.
Robin Le Mesurier, they lived literally, I could see their front door from my flat. They happened to have a band with my mate, the drummer, and his brother, the bass player, and Robin was the guitar player. And they used to come up to our flat occasionally just to bugger about and maybe have a joint or something that I didn't partake in because it made me sick. And I knew them as friends. And then when my mum said, can we, I said, can we have 3 more Womble costumes? We all convened on my mum's house and spent all night making 3 more costumes. So the whole family was stitching and sewing and whatever we could do, painting noses black and stuff like that. And I rang up the boys, my mates who are the band, forget their name was as a band. I said, guys, I've got this thing called the Wombles. You've got to wear costumes. What do you think? And they went, anything, sure. So we met at TV Centre. I had 4 costumes. My mum came to sort of make sure everyone got into them all right. They zipped up the front. I said, right, this is what they are. You've got to put the long nose on. You've got to keep it on. You're not allowed to take it off when you get in the studio because the kids will see it and everything. So we tried a few steps out in the dressing room, and our turn came. We went up. He pointed the cameras at us. We mimed the thing, and that was it. And then everyone went, whoa, we just saw this thing on Top of the Pops last night with these bloody long noses and everything. And they went out and bought the record, and it went from 36 to sort of 16, and then 16 to... The record company had warned me, don't be disappointed, it won't get any further than 36. Dan Loggins, who was Kenny Loggins' brother, he was the A&R man.
Oh, wow.
I met him on the stairs coming down from Colin Forsey's office, who was the head of promotion. We're at number 36, I said, and he said, yeah, but don't be disappointed, it won't go up any further. And so then we get in on Top of the Pops, and of course we're at number 16 or whatever it was, and we went to number 4 with that first single. It was the first of 8 top 40s that we had.
I don't even know if this is true, but I've always loved the story, and I've said it, which is that, wasn't it around this time, at some point, Robin got busted for weed?
Yes.
And so was forced to leave the Wombles. And the great thing is, this is at the height of, like, Dad's Army and everything. So all the press go running to John Lemez for a quote. And John, as always, just comes up with the immortal line, "It would appear my son is too wicked to Womble."
I never heard that. I never heard that thing. We had taken advantage of Hattie's fame by having Hattie do a photograph of her with her son in a Womble costume at BBC Centre while we were doing Top of the Pops, about 3rd record in or something like that. And so everyone knew that Hattie Jake. People kept ringing me up and saying, "Are you Hattie Jake's son?" I said, "No." Somebody else in a Womble costume, pretty much identical to mine, is Hattie Jake's son. And, so I was always. People thought I must be Hattie Jake's son.
Could you have remained completely inconspicuous and no one had known it was Mike Batt? But you didn't. You revealed yourself.
I did.
And was there an element of regret about that?
What, later on?
Later on.
Possibly, but I mean, I became a bit more of a face on television. I used to do Saturday morning television. I had a couple of solo records that I did tellies on. So
I only say that because it was harder for you then to do your serious stuff.
What was I not telling them? I suppose I was not. If I'd not told them I was Mike Batt, they'd have said, "Who aren't you?"
Yeah.
Because they didn't know who I was anyway. Although people like John Peel were sort of fans of mine, dare I say, i.e. I was not fans, but they would play my stuff and say, this is quite an interesting record by this bloke called Mike Batt, da 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 da, and I was sort of one to watch, and then the Wombles happened, and John Peel never played any of my stuff ever again, and I was definitely not the sort of person that you'd invite on the old grey whistle test.
But did you have people coming up to you sort of saying, "Will you turn our children's characters into a pop group?" after that?
I had lots of people asking me to write children's songs and do stuff like that, yeah. And I did some of them. In fact, Paddington, they asked for a song, and then I wrote one, and then they decided they didn't want a song. And I absolutely know it wasn't because they didn't like it. In fact, the company that made the thing, which is the same company that made the Wombles, was the second thing they made after that. The guy who made Michael Bond, who wrote it, Paddington, he didn't want a song. He didn't want it to be like the Wombles, and I think he probably knew that after the Wombles group happened, the Wombles books became less important to the public than, dare I say, than the records at that time. So, because they thought of the Wombles as a pop group primarily, and even though that isn't the case.
So the author hated you.
She never said she hated me, but I think they sort of loved me as well because I'd made their thing famous.
Yeah.
Am I right to think that I've got a memory of first meeting you with Pete Townsend at some review? That he was doing.
That's right.
He did the Snowball Review, which was for domestic violence charity.
Yeah.
And I went on, and I remember doing Through the Barricades, but it was before I recorded it with Spandau. You were on dressed as a slug. Do you want to say that again?
A slag?
Dressed as a slug, and you crawled across.
You mentioned Barricades. That is the most sensational, fantastic song. I know you don't need telling that, and you've been told it a million times.
Yeah, thank you.
That song just made me think, fucking hell, might as well give up. Brilliant song.
This is exactly what it made me think.
Yeah.
But you were crawling across the stage
I came
as
on
a slug.
Yeah.
Did your mum make that as well?
My mum made me a slug outfit because I thought I'm going to just have a bit of fun here. I know what it was. I was doing a thing for Princess Diana and Prince Charles. Well, Princess Diana. I had a girlfriend. This was after my horrendous divorce. Very briefly, before I married my next and current
wife.
Before that, I had a period of freedom, and I was having a little fling with a young lady who was a soloist at the Royal Ballet. And she said, we've got this sort of end-of-term jolly that we have. The Prince and Princess of Wales come, and, could you do an act or something for it? I thought, well, yeah, of course. And so I made up this thing called the Slugs, a band called the Slugs, and got David Essex to be the drummer because he plays quite handy drums. And I got a ramp built so I could crawl up the ramp and still play the piano by lying down, right? Okay. So my mum made these sort of silvery glitter slug outfits, and Andy Hill played bass, but he ended up lying on his back playing it. So you could see his orange underparts, which was really not very sluggish. And he got told off for it. Because you couldn't play the bass lying down, facing the fucking floor, he told me. So it was me, Andy, and we did this thing, and, we met Prince Charles and Diana. And that was the end of that. So I got these 3 slug costumes. So when I got rung up by Pete Townsend to please come and be in his, what's his name? Whatever it was.
Snowball Review. Yeah,
I thought, well, I don't know if this is because I was afraid of going on as me, or that I just thought it'd be a laugh. So I went on as a slug, and I sang "Slip Sliding Away," I think, by Paul Simon.
Give us a nice little segue, perhaps, into his partner, his ex-partner,
Art Garfunkel.
Yes, indeed.
And you're
Artie.
So how was it working with him, writing that big hit?
Well, I wrote the piece, and they said to me, "Who would you like to sing it?" And I said, "Well, I'd really like Art Garfunkel, but I know you won't get him. So here's a list of 10 people. Art Garfunkel was on the top. Colin Blunstone was number 2.
Love Colin. He's been on the show.
Yeah,
fabulous. Singer I absolutely adore.
He sang on your Tarot album, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yes, he did. Cool, a lot of stuff. And I was John from Yes was on it as well.
Anderson.
Yeah.
Anderson, and I was number 10. So just in case I couldn't get any of them, I'll sing it. And they said, no, let's try and get the real thing. So they literally got him within 3 days or something. They got hold of Goddard Lieberson, who was a big figure in CBS Records.
Because at this time, wasn't Art was very much wanted to be an actor, didn't he?
He was. He was in a very good movie, actually.
Yeah. He was in that great Nick Rogue one.
That's right.
Yeah. Which is what finally pissed Paul Simon off.
That's right,
So 3 or 4 days later, Art Garfunkel sitting in my front room, letting me find out what key to do the arrangement in. I had to do the arrangement overnight because the session was the next morning. And I often did that. Throughout my life, I've often done the arranging. The last piece for the session was always done the night before the session. So I turned up, after sleep, and we started recording, and we put down the rhythm section again with Chris Spedding.
And
anyway.
it's a fantastically sophisticated song, though, Mike. I want to point out your early 20th century classical influence is definitely at play here, isn't it?
Thank you. Well, it was a mood thing, really. It's like once I'd worked out there was going to be about death, which is what they wanted. They write us a song about death. I mean, what do you write? Death, death, glorious death. Nothing quite like it for...
Yeah, well, that's that then.
Yeah. So eventually I thought of what to write, and it was very minery and mysterious about what happens when you die. It's, the biggest question on earth, isn't it? To us, most of us, what happens? Anyway, so that's what it was about, and so that's why it was quite mysterious and minorish. And he sang it. He asked if he could co-produce it, and I was brave enough to say no. I don't do co-producing. At the age of 25 or 26, whatever.
That's quite brave, especially as I'm amazed we managed to get the guy. Let's turn him down on his demands.
Yeah, exactly. He said, I'd like to co-produce it. I said, well, I'm afraid, I don't do.
But this was a great period for you, wasn't it? I mean, David Essex had Winter's Tale.
Yeah.
And you'd worked Elkie Brookes. You'd produced.
Yes. Of course, Lilac Wine.
Yeah.
So it was a really good. You were a happening guy.
Yes, unlike now. Yeah.
Although you've just produced the Hawkwind album, the new Hawkwind album.
Yes. So that just proves I'm not a happening guy.
Well, it's pretty happening.
No.
You might be up for a prog award.
Anyway, the fact was that Garfunkel and I were like two people jousting all night to try and get that vocal done. It took about 4 hours.
Oh, really?
To get the vocal done. And in the end, I lay exhausted in a heap on the floor, and he went off back to the Savoy to have some sleep. And Chris Spedding came in to repair the one note that hadn't been right in the perfect take that I said was perfect, and Artie said, no, it isn't, let's do it again. I said no, and that's how we sort of fell out a bit before we did the vocal. And that was why it took so long to do, because he'd sort of lost trust in me, because I'd accepted a take that wasn't perfect, knowing that there was enough isolation for Chris to come back in and put that one quaver that he'd put a foot wrong. One tiny moment was easily repairable. So we used that take at my insistence, and that meant there was a bit of bad feeling between me and Artie before we went into the studio to do the vocal.
Did you patch it up afterwards?
Oh, we patched it up afterwards. I mean, particularly when we went to number one, it makes a lot of difference. I had bad flu and I was in bed. I remember it very clearly, and I took a phone call which was from him, and he said, I rang, just thought I'd ring and say how wonderful, and we have it's almost, if I do the accent, it sounds as if I'm taking the piss, which I'm not, because we became great sort of buddies after that, and we did some good stuff together after that. I did 2 tracks for his greatest hits album, which therefore deemed it wasn't the greatest hits album, though, because they weren't hits. But anyway, and also he was on The Hunting of the Snark as well. So, and he did a great job on that.
With some great people, with Sir John Gielgud and Julian Lennon, who we've had on the show.
The Albert Hall show, it had an amazing cast.
That was fun. Yeah, the Albert Hall show. I think that the show was a lot better. I mean, if I did some stupid sort of financial things not that long ago, and it's not within my capability to just put it on again. But one thing I could do would be to put the Snark show back on again, because I think it's the central work of my life. And I suppose, as you say, Gary, talking about building worlds, I didn't build the world of the Snark because it already existed, but I built my own version of it.
Before we leave, we need to talk about your latest project, because it's another mad thing. It's another world, isn't it? It's with David Quantick as involved.
With David Quantick, yeah.
Yeah, David's great.
Fabulous, David. He's brilliant.
So I rang up David and I said, hey, fancy writing a novel? And he went, yeah, all right. And so we told him all about the backstory of all the bits and stuff in the half-written songs, bits of lyrics, gave it all to him. And then he and I would have Zoom meetings just like this and talk about the story. And
so this is going to be a comic and an album and a game,
right?
Roadblocks.
Yeah, it's all three of those things. We call it the Trinity. And the backstory, I kept saying to David, we need backstory. And so he created all this mythology that is Like that's just
right. And so it's a graphic novel.
It's a graphic novel in 7 parts, and it's already on its 4th. It's in, we managed to get distribution in W.H. Smith's. And
how's it doing?
It's doing all right. I mean, it's not worldwide smash success yet, but we sell enough comics every month to think it's worth putting them all out.
And where can we find this music?
Well, the music is called Songs from Croix Noire, which is spelled CROIX. Yeah, as in
NOIRE.
Yeah.
Right,
see,
and
we needed someone like you in
it's
the
on
room.
streaming. It's streaming.
It's out as on vinyl, CD, and streaming. Songs from Croix Noire, and it's by Ace Hansel Jr.
Listen, this has been amazing. Lovely, lovely wandery chat.
I'm sorry I rambled so much, but I'm afraid that's what you get.
That's what we want. That's what we want. That's what this is about.
Well, it's an honour. It's an honour to be invited, even though I had to
bang on our door.
Who do you have to hurl abuse at me on Twitter?
Did he?
I did. You can beep it out. But I wrote a tweet saying, "Who do you have to fuck to get onto Rockonteurs?" Yeah. And Guy wrote back saying it was actually him.
I said it was me, obviously.
Yeah. and I.
So we did.
We'll leave it as a mystery. We'll leave it as a mystery to all your listeners. As to
I feel bad. I feel bad that we didn't really talk about your amazing.
We didn't touch on Katie
Malua and that Dramatica and your work with Marianne Faithfull, but we'll save that.
Who I saw yesterday.
How is she?
In fact, I went. She's so much better. I go and visit her up at Denville Hall.
Oh, that's
fantastic.
She's doing she's so much better. It's really good.
Thanks, Mike. Anyway, thank you for coming on.
By the way, have a good tour with your Saucerful.
We got to look into the mad mind of Mike Batt.
Yeah, we got a right old rummage around, didn't we?
Yeah, but I mean, that's kind of who he is, isn't he? He's off on tangents here, and that's what his work's like. If you open up, he's got a book out, this mad book. I forgot what it's called now. It's something. What is it? It's called The Chronicles of Don't Be So Ridiculous Valley. I mean, he's got a mad mind that is huffing and puffing and creating and pronouncing endlessly.
Yes, pronouncing. All right.
As you do when you pronounce from a stage,
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yes.
Is that pronounced? Is that the word? Anyway, never mind. We're going to be back next week with someone else.
And we'll be from America, probably.
From America, yeah.
Because we'll be on the road in America, so who knows?
I've got to start packing. In fact, no, I've got to go off. I've got a gig tonight with Chris Tifford, which is going to be very, very nice.
Enjoy. It's good night from me.
Good night from them.